Namaskar and welcome to Indian Diplomacy, show on Doordarshan, India's national television channel about India's relations with the rest of the world, its key partnerships, and also about the way international trends are developing and which have an impact on India's security and prosperity. Viewers, in this episode, we are looking at the ongoing Russia-Ukraine armed conflict since February 2022 and what lessons India can draw from it, especially military and strategic lessons. And to discuss this, I have a very distinguished guest with me in the studio. Let me introduce you to him, Lieutenant General A.K.Singh. General A.K.Singh is a distinguished retired officer of the Indian Army. He was General Officer Commanding of the Southern Command, and he has headed the largest tank formations in the Indian Army, the military strategist and the author of numerous books on India's military, and he's been quoted widely and cited and seen as an important strategist. He's also been former Lieutenant Governor of the strategically important Andaman and Nicobar Islands. General Singh, welcome to Indian Diplomacy.
Thank you.
General Singh, this war has been going on now for a long time, and it was supposed to be a short and swift or an easy campaign. At least that's how the Russians had initially envisaged, but now it's been dragging on into some kind of a bloody stalemate with no easy victors but losers on all sides. So when you look at it as a military thinker and an observer and an analyst, clearly there have been major mistakes made, especially by the Russians, and it looks like they have gotten bogged down and it's not able to achieve their objectives, and even the objectives, the clear goals of war, it seems have been moved as goalposts have been shifted over time, and they have not been able to accomplish what they set out to do. So why did this happen, and what can we deduce sitting far away, thousands of miles away here in India, deduce from this whole campaign, and your thoughts, opening thoughts on this, General?
Well, thank you, Dean Chaulia. A great pleasure to be here on this very vibrant and relevant show. My opening remarks, I would state that this is a conflict that should not have been. Ever since the Cold War, the issues that confront us today have been well known to all stakeholders. But international centers of compellence have forced this conflict. On one side, you have the Americans and a subdued NATO/EU, and on the other side, Russia. The means that are being used is Ukraine, which has undergone a lot of destruction. So why did this swift conflict that was to be has prolonged so much? I am reminded of Clausewitz, who said that war is a continuation of politics by other means, and therefore, if that be so, then the political aim and political strategy should govern the military aims and military strategy. In this case, one is not very sure when the conflict started as a special military operation, what were the political aims and objectives of Russia. I think the Russian military, I have studied there for a full year, must say it's a very professional force, and therefore I was quite surprised how the basics were actually ignored. And just to name two, combined arms concept and lack of logistics was very conspicuous. Soon the Russians decided and learnt the hard way that this will not do. And therefore, there was a complete change of stance, and they gave up areas and then concentrated on the Donbass and the southern regions.
Where they have the supply lines which are
where
better.
they have supply lines to Crimea, and which is also pro-Russian.
And General, the point about the civilian population, this is when you're doing an offensive, even if you have a force ratio of 5:1, that's apparently what Russia, Ukraine were at the outset. 5:1, you would think that the offensive has the advantage over the defensive, but even though they had an overwhelming conventional advantage and even nuclear weapons which Ukraine had abandoned long ago, The point is the support of the civilian population, clearly they seem to have misread the signs, and the resistance that the Ukrainians have given and have taken back, apparently 55 to 60% of Russian occupied territories have been retaken by Ukraine in the last several months. It shows that when you try an offensive, you must be very clear about what kind of a ground situation is there in the society there, right? And looks like there was a miscalculation or a blunder there.
Absolutely. So the ground situation will dictate as to how the offensive should roll on. If you have a favorable population, of course, it's advantage to you. But offensives have also been held in unfavorable environment. But then the force ratios and the methodology of applying those force ratios have to be different. Let me make 2-3 points on this. You know, there's a direct correlation which we all professionals understand between ends, ways and means. And contrary to popular belief, the Russians committed about 150,000 troops with matching equipment. But this force was committed over 2,000 kilometers, the distance from here to Bombay and back. It was totally, having commanded a strike corps and the field army, I know it was totally inadequate for what they were, unless they were welcomed as liberators, which was not the case. Before you start any operation, the end state and conflict termination should be in your mind. At least you should have done contingency planning for that.
Exit strategy.
Exit strategy should be clear. In this case, I am not sure if that exit strategy was in place. Also, there is a very important aspect I wish to highlight. At the strategic level of military political relationship, I think the military must learn to speak truth to power, even if it is behind closed doors, so that you avoid any catastrophic mismatch during crisis. In this case, I think the Russian military doesn't come out well on that score. Maybe that's their system.
Yeah.
I can draw a parallel with one of our own cases. 2001, after the parliament attack, we were mobilized. The whole army was mobilized.
Operation Parakram.
Operation Parakram.
Yeah.
And I was at the hub of MO, then went and took over the 1st T-90 Brigade, which was part of the leading elements. But till date, we are not clear as to what was the ultimate political objective.
Absolutely. So, viewers, the point is if there is a mismatch between political objective and the military's own doctrines and plans, then you can get into a quagmire. And of course, the war is still not over, and we cannot make any judgments as to who is really a victor or a loser, but definitely there are lessons to be drawn from it. And I'd like you to hear from India's Chief of Army Staff, General Pandey, speaking about what the Indian Army deduces from this whole conflict and the lessons that Indian Army is taking by observing closely the outcome of the Russia-Ukraine war. Let's watch.
So I'll flag three major issues. First, the ongoing conflict has clearly brought out that the conventional wars are there to stay and they still continue to remain relevant. You have seen in the ongoing conflict the use of artillery guns, the use of tank, air defense guns, anti-tank guided missiles, drones and counter drones. So these weapon systems are still relevant, and what we perhaps need to take out of this is the fact that we need to continue to focus on our capability development to fight a conventional war. So that is first aspect. Second aspect is that we need to rely on our indigenous weapon systems, equipment, and we need to develop that capacity. And to that extent, we are clearly aligned to the Atmanirbharta and the Make in India initiative. And we believe going forward, that is the way to build our capability. And lastly, this conflict has again brought to the fore the importance of non-kinetic means of warfare. such as information warfare and cyber warfare. So these are the areas again in which we need to build our capability and capacities as we continue to prepare ourselves for future conflicts.
Viewers, you just heard from India's Chief of Army Staff General Manoj Pandey about the 3 lessons that the Indian Army has taken. General Singh, the thing is, conventional war, you are a tank commander yourself in your career. Conventional war is unthinkable, they said, because of mutually assured destruction and nuclear war and all these high stakes. But the way this conflict has gone on, with even nuclear weapons being threatened to be used, clearly conventional war, between nation states, old style, old fashioned 20th century type conflict is still relevant, it seems, and we need to be preparing for that, especially with the Chinese breathing down our neck on so many points across the line of actual control, both in the western and the eastern sectors. You can't rule out a conventional war, and we have to, I think that's one of the big lessons, isn't it?
Yeah, let me explain this through an experience of mine. Way back in 2008-9, I was the Director General Perspective Planning at Army Headquarters, chartered with the capability development and future build-up of the armed forces. The flavor of the season was proxy war, low-scale insurgencies, terrorist acts, etc. And there was a lot of pressure from various quarters to say, why are we investing our precious defense budget in things like tanks, guns, aircraft, which are never going to be used because conventional war is out now. And I was faced with a dilemma because I had to answer this, and therefore I drew a very important graph for myself which linked the relationship of the likelihood of occurrence with the destruction potential. And let me just give you the conclusion. The conclusion was that the more likely type of conflicts would be the low scale insurgencies, proxy wars, terrorist acts, etc. But if they occur, they would not, while they would be an irritant, they would not be a threat to the core security interests of the country. On the other hand, the likelihood of conventional war and the higher level of conflict occurring was considered very low. But if they occurred, then the nation will pay a heavy price if we were not prepared. And Dean, I actually put this across and won the day, and therefore our conventional build-up continued. Of course, we realigned some aspects to meet the ongoing threats. On the same vein, let me talk of the same period of mine. We realized that we are going to be soon in the next decade faced with a two-front challenge. I won't call it a threat, but certainly a challenge. And therefore, there was a high-powered meeting in military ops room where I made a presentation, and the Defense Minister, all the senior service officials, Defense Secretary, Foreign Secretary, NSA, everybody was present. And I gave out as to how China was becoming a great threat and also had developed great collusivity with Pakistan. And therefore, we need to be cognizant. I was challenged on this and told that you are talking off your hat. This two-front thing used to happen in the 20th century, and today our diplomacy will take care of one front. Some people still maintain that.
Yeah.
My answer to them was that, in fact, the Foreign Secretary of the day answered this. He said, diplomacy is the art of possibilities and feasibilities. A surety is the job of the
military
armed forces.
Yeah.
And let me remind you that on that presentation, we won two great things. One is the Mountain Strike Corps, which has now materialized, and the great induction of armor that we managed into Ladakh, which has saved the day when it came now.
Absolutely. General, apart from conventional war, General Pandey was also talking about, non-kinetic means. Now you see the way everything has been weaponized. Even Dr. S. Jaishankar, our foreign minister, has been commenting on this. from food, fuel, fertilizer, electricity, all kinds of things are being used as weapons now in this war. And in a way, because countries are more vulnerable due to interdependence, and suddenly you cut off the gas supply, or suddenly you impose sanctions. Clearly, banking, finance, shipping, logistics, everything is being used now as a weapon.
I'll start by reiterating two things. One is what is happening in Ukraine. Ukraine is a war battleground which has conventional, hybrid, and new generation warfares, all in a setting, a geostrategic setting that can easily spin out of control. The same would apply if there is a conflict in the subcontinent or around the subcontinent, because of the fact that all three countries are nuclear powers.
Yes.
And therefore, the stakes can be very high.
Very high.
The second is what the stress of our Prime Minister and the government has been on Atmanirbharta.
Yes.
Now you see the importance of that. I would say that is a direction we should have gone many, many years back. But I think we have been slow. The private sector did not come in, was not brought in, but better late than never. The only point to be made is that we need to accelerate much more. Let me give you an example on this. Bulk of our equipment today is of Russian origin, though we are diversifying. And Russia has been a very reliable partner, defense partner for India. But tomorrow, if let's say hypothetically, there's a India-China conflict,
yes,
I am not so sure what the supply chain would be. And therefore, we need to hasten to develop our capabilities. Okay.
General, the point about drones also, I'd like you to come in, because a lot of military strategies are focused on the Turkish Bayraktar drones that the Ukrainians have used to neutralize the Russian tanks and artillery. And on the other hand, the Russians are using Iranian supplied drones for also causing heavy destruction. So this seems like a very decisive or a game-changing new trend?
No.
And will it matter in the subcontinent? Because Pakistanis have tried to use drones against us. Chinese also have.
In some ways, this is not something that came out of the blue in the Ukraine conflict. In recent conflicts, in the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict, drones played a major role in destruction of the Armenian combat power, the same Turkish drones. Around the same time, I wrote to the military authorities that we need to take cognizance. Let me state that we have all the means available at our disposal: air defense, electronic warfare, reconnaissance, surveillance. But we need to reorganize them with this drone threat in mind. So I am sure the Indian Army is working on that. Let's say you have a target to attack, where the means of attack would get vulnerable. Would it be sensible to launch a multi-million-dollar aircraft to neutralize that target, or use a cheap drone to do that? Maybe not one, but 5 of them.
Right.
There's a lesson for us in the future, including for our Air Force. What kind of mix do we want in our Air Force? How many top-of-the-line fighter squadrons? How many drones, UAVs, etc.? And how many long-range missiles? If you have precision-guided munitions, you can take out the targets in depth without really paying a heavy penalty.
Absolutely. Viewers, General A.K.Singh has already mentioned the fact that both sides have received significant military hardware and support from their allies or partners. On this, I have a couple of very interesting news reports about the American and the European support for Ukraine, as well as the Iranian and the Chinese support for Russia. Let's just see how the two alignments, the two camps are, and then continue the discussion.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky embarked on a dramatic visit to Washington on Wednesday in his first overseas trip since Russia invaded Ukraine 300 days ago. Clad in his trademark olive green trousers and sweater, Zelensky was greeted at the White House by U.S. President Joe Biden, along with First Lady Jill Biden. where he met one-on-one with the president and thanked U.S. political leaders and the American people for their extraordinary support.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. Of course, thanks my partisan support, thanks Congress, and thanks from our just ordinary people to your ordinary people, Americans.
The visit comes at a critical time for Ukraine. Just ahead of Zelensky's arrival, Secretary of State Antony Blinken announced the United States would provide more military aid for Ukraine, including a Patriot air defense system to help it ward off barrages of Russian missiles. The Patriot missile is deemed to be one of the most advanced U.S. air defense systems, offering protection against attacking aircraft as well as cruise and ballistic missiles.
It's going to take some time to complete the necessary training, but the Patriot battery will be another critical asset for Ukraine as it defends itself against Russian aggression.
What's going to happen after Patriots are installed? After that, we will send another signal to President Biden that we would like to get more Patriots.
We're working.
That is our life. We are in war. I'm sorry.
Because you just got a glimpse of the alliance systems as they have emerged in this war. General Singh, the hardware that both sides have received have obviously tried to give each side an edge over the other. But Ukraine, of course, being conventionally much weaker, has relied much more on external support than the Russians. But the fact is, both of them have been looking around for help and in various aspects of military domain. The question really comes down to alliances. India, our view has always been that we prefer strategic partnerships, but no alliances and no formal alliances with anyone. But the lessons from this war, one of these, could this be actually a lesson that actually being part of formal alliance gives you more of protection against an outright invasion or an attack? Or should we, unlike the Ukraine-Russia force ratio, which is significantly loaded in favor of Russia, if you measure up India with China or India with Pakistan, we are not at all as significantly behind. So maybe we don't really need a formal alliance. What is the use of the alliances? Some are of the view that this war has become long and unwinnable because of these alliances and because of the heavy military support that is being pumped in from outside. Your thoughts on this whole issue of alliance, because that's a fundamental question for Indian foreign policy also going into the future, and of course our military strategy.
I think it's a strategic choice that nations make. India has always shunned alliances, from non-alliance to omni-alliance now, and to strategic autonomy. Both the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister have steered our diplomacy and national security, keeping national interests to the fore. The moment you are part of an alliance, the interests of the alliance come to the fore, not your own national interests. So I, for one, am sure and quite confident that the path that we have chosen and are treading is the right path. Let me just put it hypothetically. Suppose we had been part of an alliance, we would have had to take part as part of that alliance in the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, where our core interests did not demand so. So I think going for alliances is fraught. The Russia-Ukraine war cannot be used as a measure. Ukraine is being used by the West to diminish Russia. There is no two ways about it.
Yeah, that's why. So while it's a conventional war, it's also a proxy war, isn't it? In one way. Yeah.
And let me say, by and large, the Russians have surprised. I have seen their defense industrial complex, and it is huge. We, on the other hand, need to develop our defense industrial manufacturing complex further, and in the eventuality of a full-scale conflict, we should be actually able to turn our peacetime economy to a war economy.
Yeah.
That
Mobilization
is
of the
mobilization
resources,
of all resources. Let me say that conflict and war is a national effort. It is not just a military effort where the militaries fight and the rest of the country applauds from the sidelines. So it is a national effort. I see that any step towards going in for an alliance is fraught with grave risks and disadvantages for India.
Absolutely, and I think I agree with you on this, General Singh. Viewers, the sum of this discussion is that self-reliance and developing indigenous capabilities is very, very important in today's world, where there are lots of efforts to weaponize all kinds of interdependence, and of course the blunders that have been made even by superior powers in this war is something worth studying. In the event of a India-Pakistan war or of a India-China war, there's certainly much that we can learn from these developments and observations that we have been making. I can assure you, I'm sure General Singh will agree with me, because he's privy to these despite retiring from the military. Our armed forces are preparing for all eventualities, from limited wars to full-scale wars, and there's a whole range of scenarios which they have developed to tackle our two main adversaries. So nobody should be under the impression that India is weak or is likely to be run over or invaded by any external adversary. The point is, we are preparing, we are observing. Our officers have a history of reading and absorbing a lot of material from around the world, and that has also kept us ready. And of course, our strategic partnerships are getting elevated to higher and higher levels as a show of deterrence to our foes. So I want to thank General A.K.Singh for sharing his extraordinary insights. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for being with us.
Welcome.
On Indian diplomacy. Viewers, do think about the roles of the military in defending the country, and also military strategy, which is so significant for our foreign policy going into the future. I'll see you again soon. Until then, take care.